Hello, my name is Scott Van Arsdale. In 2016, I retired from a 30 and change career, 30-year and change career working for the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation as a fish and wildlife technician. And a good part of my duties, my favorite part, most glamorous part for sure, was working with eagles, bald eagles and golden eagles in upstate New York. During that time, I put together a PowerPoint presentation on eagles. I gave it many iterations of it over the years to various groups, bird clubs and schools, colleges, and other interested groups. It was pretty popular, and I really haven't given it much since I retired in 2016, so I'm a little rusty, and quite frankly, giving it in front of a computer screen like this is a whole lot different than giving it to a live audience. And so we'll see how it goes. I'm giving it in the early part of the great sequestration or quarantine of 2020 due to the COVID virus. You know, a lot of us are stuck at home twiddling our thumbs, and I figured this would be a good time to try an online version of my presentation so people who are interested in eagles can maybe sit back and pass some time. It's not going to be like a David Attenborugh show. I don't have an orchestra to back me up and 20,000 hours of footage boiled down into 20 seconds of instant gratification. I will be giving anecdotes from my experiences in the field, not so much in this first segment. I'm going to do this in several segments. This first segment is going to deal more with the history of bald eagles, a lot of it which occurred before I worked with them. And then we'll go into the winter time, how the bald eagles in New York, pretty much bald eagles, are faring in the wintertime and what they're up to and things like that. And then that'll bring us up to the nesting season, which will be be featured in the second segment. Throughout this presentation, like I said, it's going to be several segments, and if you lose track of where you are or whatever, I am going to have links to all the various videos on my personal website, which is stonebladeart.com /eagle is where you'll find those. I'll have the links to the various video segments. And if you want to email me directly, my email address is goeascott@gmail.com. That GOEA, by the way, is the banding abbreviation for golden eagle. That's where that comes from, if you really care or wonder what's going on with that. I do want to give special thanks to Lou Busher Jr. and Ralph Spear, who provided many of the following pictures and greatly assisted with the nest monitoring effort. Both Lou and Ralph were retired from the phone company. And in the early 2000s, I think it was right around 2002, Lou started emailing me all these great pictures, emailing them to my address at work, and some really good stuff. And I got really concerned that he was getting way too close to these birds. As I'm going to explain later, you do not want to disturb them ever, whether it's to get a good picture or just get a better view of them. You want to keep your distance away from them so you don't disturb them. Let them live wild and free and all that. So I gave him a little lecture via email that you don't want to get close to these birds. And he emailed me back, and I could envision a grin on his face as he told me via email that he had really great lenses that he could reach out there and touch them, and when I met him in the field, he certainly did. It was in the early days of the digital SLR technology, and both he and Ralph had, the bestest lenses to use for wildlife photography. And Lou took this panorama shot here of Ralph photographing an immature eagle on one of the New York City reservoirs in Delaware County, and he gave Ralph heck for wearing white pants and a tan jacket, because any self-respecting wildlife photographer is going to be wearing a camouflage. So they were two guys who had fun, ragging on each other and stuff while they went on their day-long expeditions photographing eagles. Unfortunately, Lou passed away a number of years ago, and I lost touch with Ralph. I hope Ralph is still going. I hope you get to see this, Ralph, and thank you for the pictures and all the camaraderie over those years in the early 2000s there. They did give us, both Lou and Ralph gave myself and Pete and I, who you'll meet in a minute, permission to use their photographs in our DEC work for presentations and other materials, educational materials. And since I'm no longer with the DEC, they didn't explicitly give me permission to use pictures in this presentation. And I do use pictures from other people that I did have permission to use for DEC purposes. And if you actually happen to see this video and your work is featured, I ask that you just not worry about it. I'm not going to make any money, but if you're worried about abuse of your work or whatever, you do own it, please let me know and I will certainly remove it. I don't want to get anybody's knickers in a twist here, but I will not make any money doing this, so hopefully that won't be a problem. I am going to talk about the eagles we have, fortunately, because we came darn close to losing them. We were right on the edge, as I'll explain here. In the last century, the mid part of the 1900s, they really took a dive, and they're in bad shape, and there are several reasons for that. Loss of habitat was a big one. If you look at photographs from most anywhere in rural upstate New York, in the Northeast for that matter, say from the 1850s, 1900 or whatever, the woods were just cleared. It was all open pasture and ag fields and just bare hillsides that were cleared for agriculture and lumber and all that. I could give a presentation for an hour probably just on the loss of habitat. I'm not going to, but it was a different landscape back in the day. Direct persecution. Back in the day, people lived very close to the land. They depended on their livestock, and they had a human superiority complex for sure. And for many people, the only good predator was a dead predator. They would shoot any predator they came across or kill them, do whatever, including bald eagles. Disturbance. I'm going to talk about disturbance quite a bit. Now, this is human disturbance of eagles. It's never good to disturb an eagle at all. It's survival of the fittest. Some of them, might be having a tough time making a living, and certainly being disturbed by people that interferes with their attempts and efforts to feed themselves and breed and stay alive and all that. And it's also, in most cases, very illegal, and I'll talk about that further on in our presentations here. But disturbance certainly contributed to the bald eagle decline. The really big thing, it was the coffin nail, the finishing blow was chemical poisoning, which the big thing that really did it was DDT. DDT was a pesticide which worked beautifully as a pesticide. I think it came into use starting in the 1930s, and it just eliminated any kind of insect problems in crops, in areas where mosquitoes were a problem, black flies, all very easily controlled. Bed bugs. Bed bugs are a problem until DDT came along. It just worked so well at killing bugs. Unfortunately, it also killed a lot of birds by interfering with birds' ability to produce enough calcium to have viable eggs. The eggshells require a certain amount of calcium to be structurally sound, and contaminated mother bird and a lot of species could not reproduce because of that. And many bird species, including eagles and other birds of prey, but also many songbird species, declined to almost nothing because of this DDT poisoning. But with all that, I can say here now, I live in rural upstate New York, and basically I see eagles almost every day when I'm out and about. They are around, they're doing good, we have them, they're reproducing well, their population is fairly strong, so they're back. And there are reasons for that as well, which I'll talk about now. Bald Eagle Act in 1940, passed by Congress in Washington, made it illegal to kill eagles. You could no longer shoot them or trap them or try to get rid of them. That activity was now illegal. Habitat recovery. This in itself could be another whole program or a few. In upstate New York, the habitat came back. First, marginal farms were no longer profitable. The soil was too thin. Usually these were the hillside farms and things like that. So those areas were not profitable for farming, so they were abandoned for agriculture and regenerated back into forest. And a good example I always like to use in my presentations, which is pertinent here to southeastern New York, is the New York City reservoir system. What happened there through land buying and eminent domain, the City of New York Board of Water Supply took over a lot of the prime land along some of the rivers, and they dammed the rivers to create the impoundments for the city water supply. It's a pretty extensive system. It goes well over 100 miles away from New York City, up throughout southeastern New York, and that they kicked the people off the land, created these big reservoirs, which was great habitat for the bald eagle. The bald eagle is primarily a fish eater. It needs that aquatic habitat, and by having the people off the land, they could live in these reservoir areas without being disturbed by people. And that was pretty important during for the first nesting bald eagles in southeastern New York anywhere. They did use these reservoir area habitats quite extensively for nesting, which really aided in the recovery here in southeastern New York. And you can tell similar tales across upstate New York. Habitat recovery is very important, and we wouldn't have the eagles back, at least and nowhere near the numbers we have now, if it wasn't for the habitat recovery. Banning of DDT in 1972, ultra important. If that hadn't happened, I wouldn't be talking about the eagles we have in New York State today. I'd be talking about the eagles we used to have, with absolutely no experience, because I never would have had any experience with eagles in the wild. That was critical, key move, the banning of DDT in 1972. Endangered Species Act, signed into law by Richard Nixon in 1973. I can't imagine a Republican president in this day and age signing similar legislation, but in matter of fact, Nixon did sign it in 1973. And this gave a whole bunch of other protections for bald eagles and golden eagles beyond the Bald Eagle Act in 1940. You still couldn't shoot them or kill them, but now it gave habitat protections as well. Government agencies like DEC and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service could protect nesting areas and roosting areas and other critical bald eagle habitat. If Walmart wanted to put in a supercenter near an eagle nest, and not so fast. The government has some tools in its possession to make sure the eagle's needs are protected. In spite of that, in the mid-1970s, we only had one remaining bald eagle nest in New York State. And the female was contaminated with DDT, couldn't produce a viable egg. So they tried every year They tried to, lay egg. They did lay eggs, but they weren't viable, so they didn't have young. And so for all intents and purposes, we wiped the bald eagle out of New York State. There were still a few individuals around, but they weren't reproducing. So that means the end of the species, except step in the DEC again. There's an ancient falconry technique where a falconer wants to raise his birds, a falcon or a hawk or eagle that he wants to hunt with, doesn't want it to be too tame. So he doesn't want to raise it in the living room. He raises it in a cage out on the landscape. Keep the bird from getting too imprinted on people. And that was the idea behind this reintroduction of birds of prey. It started with the DEC deciding they wanted to attempt a reintroduction program. And Dr. Tom Cade from Cornell University had successfully used this hacking method, this falconry hacking method, with peregrine falcons to reintroduce peregrine falcons to the wild. So the DEC got together with Tom Cade to come up with a plan to do it with bald eagles. And the DEC staff involved from the get-go was Peter Nye, who was my eagle mentor, and he was in charge of the bald eagle program as well as the endangered species unit when I first started working with bald eagles. And everything I did with eagles was under his watchful eye, and he mentored me along and brought me up to speed. And I want to take a moment right now to thank him profusely for giving me the opportunity to work with these birds and all the eagle people like Pete, and he had a lot of help within and outside of the DEC, and I really enjoyed working with all the eagle people as well. In fact, these slides of the hacking towers and the hacking program, which I'm going to use here in the next few minutes, were provided by Pete. Pete, thanks. I know I didn't reach out to you for permission for this purpose. I hope it's okay. And I hope I do it justice. Like I said before, I was not involved with this hacking effort, although two of my classmates at SUNY Cobleskill were as seasonal technicians, and some of my friends from the DEC and beyond were involved in the hacking program. Hi, Lois. They started off small. For the first 5 years, they weren't sure this was going to work, and there weren't a lot of eaglets. I'm going to use eaglets and chicks and baby eagles interchangeably here. Eaglets is the correct term, but we don't always use it. 23 eaglets, mainly obtained from captive sources and wild nests in the Great Lakes, mainly Wisconsin, were hacked at this first location, which I can tell you now is at Montezuma National Wildlife Refuge, north of Cayuga Lake, west of Syracuse and east of Rochester. They put in a few birds a year, and the whole idea was these birds were put in this cage right here on the landscape, this hacking tower, and somebody climbed up that scaffolding every day to put in food, usually fish, but could have been roadkill and other things as well, to feed the eagles, as their parents would have fed them had their parents been around. And it was hoped that however the birds GPS themselves, for lack of a better word, in the wild, an eagle will generally nest within 200, 250 miles or less of its natal nest. These birds came from much farther away than New York State for the most part, and they were hoping they would imprint on New York State coordinates, through this hacking program. That wasn't a given when they first tried this. So it was a limited effort at first. 23 eagles in the first 5 years. By 1980, all results, including 2 birds from that 1976 year class who got together and started a nest of their own, some distance, but certainly within the 200-mile range of this hacking tower, showed that this is a viable method of eagle reintroduction. I will say all of these birds received leg bands and wing tags, which made them identifiable on the landscape through optics and whatnot. So it was clear by 1980 that surviving birds were not dispersing great distances, so they could be reintroduced fairly close to their hacking locations. So they decided to increase the efforts at 3 other locations around the state. One in western New York at Iroquois National Wildlife Refuge, one at the city of Albany Water Supply, Alcove Reservoir, and a 4th one up at Follansbee Pond in the Adirondacks. At the time, that was privately owned. It was a big estate. Now it is public land now, but at the time it was private, which is important. You don't want the public just wandering into these areas to see the eagles and creating disturbances and getting these eaglets used to people. You want to keep them wild. Here's one of the locations, and you can see each one of those boxes has an eaglet in it. Captive and Great Lakes sources could not provide enough birds necessary to do the full reintroduction effort here, so DEC switched to getting the birds in Alaska, which is a whole story in itself that I really wish I got to do, but it was before my time working with the eagles. But if you look up at the top of the picture, it's a little blurry. I apologize for that. You can see a video camera, which is pretty high tech for the early 80s, so they could monitor these birds remotely without imprinting them. Here's the late Mike Allen. Unfortunately, Mike passed away a couple or so years ago. He became a good friend. I got to work with him every year when I went out to Western New York to assist Pete with banding eaglets and nests out there. And when we got to Mike's region, which is Region 8, we would spend a night at his house, camped out on his floor, and Mike would accompany us, or we would accompany Mike, however you want to look at it, as we did visited the nests in Region 8 and banded the youngsters. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That'll be in the next segment on nesting and what we do. In this case, this is on the chartered boat in Alaska, and at the time there was an eagle nest roughly a density of 1 every mile going up the Alaska coast, and they'd have multiple climbing teams. They'd be dropped off at the shore, and they'd go up into the nest and grab a youngster and bring it down. They'd be stowed in these crates on the boat for a while, until the quota was reached, and they'd be flown back to New York State to be reintroduced, or to become New York birds from Alaska. And here I can see Mike has a bunch of leg bands out and other banding paraphernalia and recording data sheets. So each bird is receiving leg bands to identify the bird, and no doubt being measured and processed in that way. Because the birds were on board for multiple days, you just couldn't leave them in these crates. That wasn't right, so they would let them out to get fresh air and sunshine. Sure, they're going to get imprinted, or they're going to get used to people a little bit, but hopefully not enough to affect them in the wilds in New York. Look at the lower left-hand corner of your picture here, and you can see one of them peeking out from the box and trying to say something, who knows what. Somebody's job. It was hard work, a tough job, but somebody had to do it. They just fished all day, trying to catch food for these birds. Can you imagine getting paid to go up to Alaska and fish to feed eagles? Pretty cool stuff. Really wish I had been around for that. Here's a young Pete and I putting a bird in its new home in the Hacking Tower in New York State. one of the many eagles, 198 eagles that were reintroduced into New York State this way. And Pete was the driving force behind the Eagle program from during this reintroduction right on through until 2010 or 11 when he retired. And he still to this day remains a source of information for the department and the Eagle program. Here's a shot of one of the levels in the hacking towers with the multiple birds waiting for release time into the wilds in New York. These are the locations around the state, the 4 locations which I've already talked about where these birds were hacked. Here's a bird. What it was, eagles and other birds of prey learn how to be eagles and how to feed themselves and all the things important to being eagles from their parents. And during hacking, the parents aren't around, and that doesn't apply. So in order to give them a fairly good chance of survival, when they fledged, which means leave the nest, 10 to 13 weeks usually for a bald eagle, when it was about that time when they were good to go, the hacking towers were opened up, the cages were opened up, and the birds were allowed to leave when they were ready to. But staff would leave food out on the landscape where the eagles could find it and feed themselves while they learned to hunt in the wild for their own food. So that was part of the process. Between 1976 and the last year of hacking in 1988, 198 eaglets were hacked at those 4 New York sites. In addition to that, 6 eagles, mostly from captive sources, 6 eaglets were placed in that last remaining nest where they could no longer reproduce because of DDT, and they were fostered by the adult eagles at that last remaining nest. So a total of 204 eaglets were released in New York State during those years. It was so successful that 17 other states and the province of Ontario in Canada followed suit with their own hacking programs. And in 2010, which was the last year DEC did intensive productivity monitoring, that was counting the number of eaglets that fledged from the nests. There were 192 nesting pairs that year in 2010 with 244 eaglets fledged. I will say, I came back, I retired in 2016, but DEC Region 4 hired me back in April and May of 2017 and 2018 just to monitor nests. And at that time, by 2018, we had well over 300 nests statewide. And since we no longer do, DEC no longer does intensive productivity monitoring, we don't know how many eaglets were fledged, but it was a considerable number, I can promise you that. They are doing pretty well at the moment. Okay, that's enough about the history. We're going to gear into the eagles we have now, and I'm going to start with the winter time. Here in New York State, I mentioned that bald eagles are primarily fish eaters, and they do range well into Canada, northern New England, Adirondacks and stuff, but there's not a lot of open water in those geographic areas in the wintertime. It's just too cold, so the birds migrate south until they can find open water to fish, basically. They do take other things. They take waterfowl and scavenge dead critters when they can find it, but they do look for open water. So very often that means southeastern New York and other areas of New York. Traditionally, the big wintering areas were the Delaware River system, Hudson River, and in milder winters, St. Lawrence River. But now, like this past winter, this winter of 2019-2020, was really quite mild here in southeastern New York anyway. There's lots of open water and eagles are everywhere. And I will mention, now that the nesting densities are getting pretty high, we're seeing more and more of the eagles staying right near their nest throughout the year, regardless of what the water conditions are. And we assume that's so they can defend the nest territory from intruders, so they don't come back from their winter migrations to find their nesting territory occupied by somebody else. Competition is getting keen for nesting sites in some areas, really keen in some areas here in Region 4. Nest densities are just getting unbelievably tight, so the eagles just do not leave them anymore, even though there might be better eats somewhere else. One of the first things I got to do traditionally in the wintertime, right around January 10th, is participate in the National Bald and Golden Eagle Survey. It's actually international because Canada participated as well. And during this thing every year, the same routes were run by car, by plane, by boat, by foot, and the number of eagles seen were counted, were tallied up. I got to participate in the southeastern New York flight, done with a helicopter every year. We'd run the same route. We'd leave the Albany airport, go up a mile or two to the Mohawk River, and then follow the Mohawk River down to the Hudson, down the Hudson River to Croton Point in Westchester County, pretty close to New York City. On a clear day while we were flying, we could see the New York City skyline from there. And then we'd head west into southeastern New York to check various reservoirs in the Delaware River system, back up through my area in Region 4, some of the northern New York City reservoirs and Power Authority Reservoir, and back to the Albany Airport, and done. It's a long day of flying, about 6 hours of flight time all told. And if you've ever been in a Huey helicopter, the military surplus helicopters, which we used a lot, they beat you up pretty good. They vibrate a lot, they're loud, they knock you around, but there's good visibility from them. So we liked having the Hueys for this duty. And what we did, we would count all the eagles we saw. Some years we'd count more than others, and it wasn't always population related, as I'll show here in a second with a couple slides. Eagles respond to different weather conditions. If there's a nice breeze and good weather for soaring, they'll soar around. They're trying to conserve energy in the wintertime, and they're not burning a lot of excess calories by soaring. Flap their wings a couple times to get up and going, and then they can just put their wings out and glide around. Doesn't take a lot of energy to do that, and while they're doing that, they might find a good food source or good roosting source or something that could be important to them while they're gliding around. We would count more if the soaring conditions weren't great, and then they'd be congregated near the water sources, which were food sources. So what we were really doing is looking at trends over the years. We might have a down year or two, but it wasn't a great concern population-wise, because the next year we might count 200 and some eagles on the flight or whatever. And it was basically monitoring population trends over a period of time was the whole purpose for this. Because of the cost of the helicopter time and because the eagles were doing so well, this wintertime helicopter flying was suspended, eliminated before I retired by a year or two, just to save money. It did cost a lot. Helicopter time is expensive. Here we are flying up the Delaware River. It's Pennsylvania on the left, Sullivan County in New York State on the right. Counting eagles, we would fly just a bit above the treetop level and fly these same routes every year, counting eagles. Here, my pointer's not working on the presentation. I apologize for that, but here's a somewhat blurry picture. It's hard to get a clear picture from a Huey helicopter because of all the vibration and movement, but there's 2 adult eagles below there being counted. They're on the wing. And here, flying back to the Albany airport, just off the Alcove Reservoir near Albany. Those are the Alcove hacking towers. that were important during the eagle reintroduction in New York. They're still standing, or were as of a couple years ago, but no longer in use. They haven't been used since '88 or before. Here's a picture of an eagle soaring in the wintertime. I've already explained their strategy there. And here's another conservation, energy conservation strategy they will employ. Hopefully they know where the food is and they fill up their crop in the morning, and then they like to loaf around all day if the soaring conditions aren't great and conserve energy. Unfortunately, a lot of these waterways where they like to get their food and loaf around during the day are near roadways. Roads are very often built along these waterways, which can be a problem for the eagles because they can be perched near the road, sitting there minding their own business, and motorist comes along, sees the eagle. Wow, look, there's a beautiful eagle. Real close to it. They stop and watch it for a while, and they get bored. They want to see it fly, or they want to get a picture of it flying. So they do this. And this is not a good thing to do. Please don't do this. The older gentleman on the left trying to get a picture of a perched eagle wants to get a picture of it flying, though. He's probably already has 30 pictures of it perched there. Time to get a picture of it flying, so the younger guy is launching a snowball at the eagle to get it to fly. Bad news. There you go. It's winter time. These eagles, some of them are cutting it pretty close. They've got to maintain their body temperature during super cold nights. They've got, got to get enough calories in to do that, as well as, they're getting ready to nest as well, which requires a lot of energy for egg production and the nesting activities. It's just not good. And a younger eagle who may not be experienced at getting food very often will not make it through the winter time. So by making them fly, you're making them burn more calories than they normally would. It's not good for the eagles, and it's not good for you because it's highly illegal. Believe it or not, disturbing eagles' maximum penalty is a $100,000 fine and a year in prison. I don't think you would get that for doing this, especially on a first offense, but it would be a possibility. You get a hanging judge, you're going to be sorry you disturbed the eagles. In this case, this picture was taken by an eagle volunteer down in Sullivan County, who happened in a clear version of this picture. You can see that license plate. So this picture with a license plate number was given to a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service agent. So I'm sure these two gentlemen are very sorry they did this. I never did hear how their case went and what became of it, but I don't think you'll be seeing them doing this again, and please don't do it yourself. Here, this is an email that both Pete and I got, accompanied by a picture from a woman who said, "I'm pretty sure this is an immature bald eagle. He was eating a dead raccoon in the road when we first saw him, and when he flew, wow, what a wingspan. I didn't have any long lens with me, so I went home and got it, and took a chance that he would still be nearby the raccoon when I got back, and sure enough he was. I got out of the car and got some shots. I walked closer and got some more, and as I was within a few feet of the raccoon, he flew away. I've never been that close to an eagle before without it flying away. You could tell he was wanting to finish his supper." Well, duh. If he's eating a raccoon, he's hungry, he wants to fill his crop of food so he can get some calories to go on with his life. Don't disturb him. It's just wrong on all levels, and plus, for doing this, you could be fined $100,000 and get a year in jail. As I said before, it probably won't happen, but it's not a good thing to do. If you want to get pictures of eagles, okay, go out and invest in a good camera with proper lenses, or even, maybe some of the iPhones now can reach out there too. Some of the point and shoots have incredible zooms. Watch them with optics from a distance, and if you want to photograph them, make sure you have the proper equipment to do it from a distance. Guidelines say you want to keep at least 350 feet away from any eagles or nest. That's not given what it is. You can get closer than that and not be illegal. The law says you're not allowed to disturb eagles, and that 350 feet is a guideline to prevent you from disturbing them. If you happen to see one perched along the roadway closer than that, you can get closer with your vehicle without disturbing them, but stay in your vehicle. Don't get out of your vehicle. Don't make any quick movements. Be respectful of the eagles. Don't disturb them. If you see one getting agitated, looking at you a lot, and maybe calling, looking like it's getting antsy, ready to fly, back off to avoid disturbing them. It's super important, not just for the law, but for the eagles as well. During the wintertime, eagles are gregarious, which is a fancy term for being social. If they're away from their nest in their nesting territory, they're not defending a territory, and they get together in groups. They'll roost at night in communal groups, and near areas with lots of food, maybe a dead deer carcass or a lot of fish concentrations or things like that, they will group up. In this case here, you see the two full adults with a white head and white tail. It takes them 5 years to get that full white head and white tail, and two immatures, young birds, are with them. It's a natural inclination to think this is mommy and daddy and the two kiddos, but not necessarily. In the wintertime, everybody's mixed up. The youngsters especially get foot loose and can go hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles away from their natal nest, to return 5 years later, like I said before, within a couple hundred miles of the nest. But when you see a group like this in the wintertime, there's really no reason to believe they are all related. It's not a family group. And they don't just hang out in the trees. Here's a number of eagles that Lou got a shot of on the ice of one of the reservoirs. And just because they're gregarious and social doesn't mean they totally get along. They do skirmish and get mock battles going and generally annoy each other. Usually these types of activities aren't too terribly concerning this time of year. They don't often result in injuries, although later on in my presentations we'll see where you can't always trust that. They might frolic around in the air if they're feeling their oats. Here we have an immature eagle getting on the six of a more experienced flying adult eagle. And watch what happens in this series of shots. The immature is still on the six of the adult eagle. The adult eagle, being the more experienced flyer, though, he turns the tables on the immature eagle and gets on at six. And the adult eagle wins the dogfight. Here's a shot of some skirmishing up in the air. What the adult eagle on the bottom is doing there, the talons are its most formidable weapon. They can bite, but their main weapon is those huge, sharp, and strong claws that they have there. And what the adult eagle is doing there, is showing its talons to the approaching immature eagle, saying don't come any closer or you're going to lose some blood, boy. But it's also protecting its vitals. The heart and lung area, the vital parts of the eagle that it needs to protect to stay alive from an aggressive intruder like that, or an aggressor. It's keeping between its talons and the aggressor to protect the vital area. Okay, I haven't mentioned in this presentation because everybody already knows, but I will put forth that the bald eagle is the United States national bird, as everybody knows. Ben Franklin wanted it to be the wild turkey, and I'm not going to say he was right or anything, but our national symbol has an order of preference for getting food, which might leave us scratching our head a little bit. Its least favorite way to get food is to go out and hunt for prey. It'll do it if it has to, and it does do that, but its second least favorite or second most favorite way of getting food is to go out and scavenge it. Already dead food or nearly dead food on a landscape or in the water, a floating fish, or roadkill, or an animal that's died from other causes. It will scavenge its food that way. Its absolute most favorite way to get food is to steal it from another eagle or another species like an osprey. And the biological term for this activity is called kleptoparasitism. They just do it. There could be plenty of food available, and if one eagle is working on a morsel in that midst of food, another eagle shows up and it's going to be inclined to try to take that morsel away from the other eagle that already has it in its possession. It's what they do. I've heard various theories about why they do that. One theory says that, well, they're able to make sure that all of the eagle individuals at least get some food. And I saw another theory put forth that said that no, it's just pure survival of the fittest. The strongest, most aggressive eagle is going to get the most food and survive in times of a limited food supply. And I think with nature, most things are related to survival of the fittest. That's my opinion, but it doesn't mean the former theory doesn't carry some weight too. And whatever, I'm not going to solve it here this afternoon during this presentation anyway, but in this case here, the adult eagle wants an alewife, which is a herring. Here in upstate New York, they're landlocked and a lot smaller than the ocean-run alewife herrings that you might see along the coast or that are running up the rivers. Exclude the phone here. I am home. I'm not going to answer it. Sorry about that. This adult eagle wants the alewife, which isn't showing up in the picture too well, but it's there, and it's going to come in and try to take it from this immature bird. Whoops, there we go. You saw it. It came and it took the alewife. Sorry, I got a little flustered there with the phone ringing. Here, this series of pictures was taken on the Conowingo Reservoir, or below the Conowingo Dam, which is the last dam and reservoir on the Susquehanna River before it empties into the Chesapeake Bay. And it is a major bald eagle concentration area in the wintertime. Fish go through the hydroelectric system there and get spit out down below the dam and are easy prey, or easily collected by eagles. In this case, I do want to say this is a Woody Dawson photo. Lou Busher used to travel down to the Conowingo to get pictures of the eagles there, and he met up and networked with many other photographers. And Woody Dawson graciously allowed me to use this series of photos that Lou Busher forwarded on to me for my presentation. Woody, if you see this, thank you for the use of your pictures for the DEC presentations. I hope you don't mind me using it here. The bird on the bottom there, you can see it has a blue band on its right leg and a silver band on its left leg. The silver band is a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service band. The band on the right is a New York State band. Blue is a color assigned to New York State. It has a 3-digit code, which you can't see in this particular shot, but in some of the shots, we were able to identify this bird. And this bird, I banded myself in an Otsego County nest in upstate New York, Region 4, the May before this shot was taken. The shot was taken in the wintertime, and I banded it in its nest when it was just a little eaglet in Otsego County. And here it is trying to relieve the other young of the year eagle of the gizzard shad it has in its talons, and watch what happens. That is what they like to do, kleptoparasitism at its finest. In this case here, Lou took a series of shots, a couple adult birds on the ice. They're in a foot race to get to an alewife, which is up on the ice. And there's the victor. Won the foot race and got to the alewife to gobble it down. If all else fails, if you can't steal your food from another eagle or osprey and there's nothing to scavenge, you have to go out and go hunting or fishing for it. Lou told me when he took this series of shots on the Delaware River, it was about 10 degrees Fahrenheit out. And here we have an eagle right in the river going fishing. Dunking for alewives. Not always successful. Missed that time. We're going to try again. Boom. There, it successfully snagged an alewife. You have to wonder if there's enough calories in that fish there to offset the calories expended by being in cold water on a 10-degree day. But that's what they do. And sometimes, you can fly around and pick either dead or moribund fish off the surface, or catch a fish sunning itself unawares that it is about to become dinner for an eagle. This immature is going to give it a try. Unsuccessfully that time. There's no fish in the talons there. See if this adult has any better luck. Right in the water to grab at a fish. Then up and away, and sure enough, there is a fish in the talons there. Here's another attempt. I think I got those a little out of sequence. I apologize for that. And they're easy peasy. That was an easy catch for this eagle. And watch what it does. Decides to transfer the fish from its talons to its beak, and then fly away, hopefully where it can gobble it down before another eagle comes along and tries to steal it. Here, this one, it flew into the trees with its fish to try to eat it in peace. But if all else fails, you can sit around and look like a penguin and hope a penguin comes by. Of course, that's just being silly. We don't have penguins in New York State. I don't think there are any plans to reintroduce them because I don't believe they ever lived here. I'm just laughing it up. Here's a shot that Lou provided. I don't know exactly what this eagle is doing, whether it's conserving energy, trying to dry out, wait for a fish to come by. I don't know, but it was a good shot, so I put it in the presentation. Okay, during the winter time, there are these communal areas, and especially you see a lot of eagles, and sometimes people, the uninitiated, don't even realize that birds that look like this are bald eagles. When they're younger, they go through various plumage phases, and there's a lot of variability in some of those phases. So they can really confuse people. Even me, don't have a ton of experience of aging these immature eagles, especially the 1 to 3 year olds. When they leave the nest, they're very dark, mistaken for golden eagles by the uninitiated a lot, but there are key differences there. But then you get into the variation. The bird on the left there, starting to get the white feathers on the head and an osprey mask. I'm going to put that one going into its soon to be 3 years old, basically. It's got a lot of white feathers on the belly, which we call the white belly phase. They don't all get that much white. The bird on the right, still very dark head, hasn't molted into the white feathers on the head at all yet and stuff. I'd put that a year younger probably. Just guessing though. Those in the know may take me to task on this one. And there's a classic white belly, a younger bird with after its first molt, with just a lot of white feathers on the belly, and in the tail, that tail almost looks like a golden eagle tail, and just starting to see an osprey type mask on its face there. I put this bird probably going into its pretty soon to be 3 years old, starting to get the osprey mask with the white feathers on the head. And here I put this one definitely going into its 3rd year, with the white feathers showing up on the head. Here's a bird probably going to be 4 years old with a very distinctive osprey-like mask there. And then a bird that soon to be 5 is what I put it at, losing most of the darker feathers on the head and tail, but it's still got a few. And then 5 to 35 or 40-year-old bird there. There's no way to tell if they're not banded. If they're banded when they're of known age, we can tell how old they are when they're older. But once they get the full white head and tail, there's really no way to age them unless they are banded. And very quickly, I will say, I think we have the record here in New York State now, if I'm not mistaken, for a wild eagle. A bird from that 1976 year class, hacked at Montezuma that first year, was hit by a car a couple years ago and killed and recovered, and it was 38 years old when it was hit by a car. So they can live a long time in the wild. Most are not going to make it that far. In fact, a lot of them don't make it through their first year. They get into trouble, they're not experienced enough, or if conditions are bad and food's hard to get in the wintertime, they don't get through their first winter. But if they do get through that first year, they have enough experience and they're very likely to make it through the next 5 years. There are things that I'll talk about in a later presentation which can cut that short, but we won't get into that too much right now. In the wintertime, as the days are getting longer, they've been getting longer since right before Christmas at the winter solstice. The lengthening daylight triggers their instinct to reproduce. They start spending more time in nesting activities, pair bonding and defending the nest territory, working on the nest. Here we have 2 adults in their nest tree. The nest is just to the right of the picture here. And I gave this presentation many times, and it wasn't unusual to have some guy in the audience pipe up, "Well, you know which one is the female, har, har, har." Well, sorry guys, that one doing the squawking is indeed the male. He's squawking at the female there. I don't know what he's telling her. She doesn't look too happy about what it is, but that's a shot I have always had to include in my presentations because it's such a great shot. Thanks, Lou. We would always, even to this day, the DEC wants to know where all the nest locations are so they can go into a database to trigger review if there's any kind of development slated for an area. But back when we only had a few nests in New York State, we were always excited to learn of a new one. And if somebody reported to us that they saw an eagle flying with nesting materials such as this, it was an exciting thing. And Pete and I would, during those early years, offered a case of beer or a bottle of wine to anybody who discovered a new nest. So that was pretty good incentive, besides just the excitement of finding an eagle nest, to go out and find one. And when you saw behavior like this and the nest wasn't readily apparent, all you really had to do was watch where the birds were flying. Some nests are very easy to see. They're like a billboard. You can't miss them. And others are a little harder to find. But by following an eagle flying with nesting material, you could very often get a pretty good idea where the nest was or is. Here's a shot of it, a pair working on a nest that Lou took, getting ready to lay and incubate eggs. Although this is the male right here on the left. If you look real closely, you can see a bit of the female's head there. Males don't lay eggs. I'm sure that's news to you. Here's a shot of a male at another nest, hanging out, waiting to become a father for the year. With that, I'm going to close down. We're getting into the nesting portion of my presentation, which I'm going to do in another segment. Here, I didn't cover the hacking effort with real great detail, partly because I wasn't involved with it and I didn't want to put my foot in my mouth. So the DEC website has some information. You can go there. Best thing, just go to dec.ny.gov and punch in eagle hacking. And there's other information there as well on bald eagles. It's doesn't always flow really well. You can go to one page and there's no links to some of the other information. So search around pretty good and find it. And I will mention an author by the name of Darryl McGrath wrote a book that was put out a few years ago, which covers in pretty great detail the hacking effort for both the bald eagles and the peregrine falcons. She interviews Pete and Mike Allen a lot, and there's a lot of information there on hacking. If you're really interested in the hacking program and the reintroduction and the people who are involved, it's a great story, and Darryl McGrath did a good job with it in her book titled Flight Paths. You can find it on Amazon. It's not cheap, but it's worth the read, and you may want to check your library or maybe interlibrary loans after this quarantine period for the COVID-19 ends, or get it through Amazon, pay the price. I'm sure that Darryl will appreciate it, and read it while you're quarantined. Thank you. That's the end of the presentation, this part of it. And next we will go to the nesting bald eagles.